Hello, welcome to Into the World Radio. I am your host, Kurt. Today, I want to talk about intelligence and IQ. I've been encountering a lot of people in my life recently with incredibly high IQs, and I'll try and explain what I mean by IQ. And it's something that I really enjoy is people that are like really mentally strong and really mentally fit. I like watching how their mind moves the same way that I like watching dancing or traditional martial arts or something like that, or just something moving beautifully. I've never understood IQ because it's something that I've just always dabbled in. I've always been kind of a mental person. And I was thrown into a mental culture or a mental institution when I was younger, surrounded by other mental people. So I never really got an aspect on what that was, because it was like so looked down on to not be that, right? Like if you get into a culture where there's like an entrance examination based off of your mental strength, you end up only being around other strong people. It's like how if you're on the sports team, you're only around you don't quite understand what it's like to be weak or delicate or sensitive, right? Like if you're on the football team, you don't understand the strength of ballet or what exactly is going on that allows somebody to be a pool shark or a marksman, or you just get kind of accustomed to your own strength, and it's just the background noise. So I never really understood what everyone was doing when they're smart, because it was just an assumed skill. So it's like kind of after I finally broke out of that bubble, and then you also have to drop the judgment that comes from those communities, right? Communities that are based on strength. There's just this unconscious judgment of the weak, right? Like if you're in a powerlifting community, or if you're in an intellectual community, you judge people who aren't intellectuals, even unconsciously. Like maybe if you're not judging the person, it's like you've worked your whole life for strength. So there's this judgment of weakness. So after finally after bumping into the limitations of intellectual strength, right? Let's say that I was a power lifter and I wanted to learn how to fly or become flexible or, do something that needed less physical mass. You start to see the limitations of the strength. And I sort of started to see that with intelligence. So I lost the judgment, and so it's almost like I can't even get rid of this mental strength. It's like ingrained in me, but I at least have the desire in me to want to. And then I noticed that also got rid of the judgments of people with different types of strength. So you don't see them as you don't see low IQ people as dumb, right? So if you're into intelligence, you see low IQ people as dumb. And that's like a football player thinking that anybody who can't bench 500 pounds is weak. And it's just an oversimplification of things. So, and then once I got rid of that, I started to actually super, really appreciate smart people again. Like once I didn't want to be that anymore. And then I also started to really appreciate non-intellectuals. So there's this muscle of focus and intensity. I don't even know I'm not sure how I would coach it. I can see myself doing it, and I can see other people doing it, and I can see people not able to do it. And it's somehow, it's related to your head, and it's like closing your hand. I don't know how do you coach it? And it's like, how do you coach somebody to squeeze their hand really hard? I don't know how that works, even though it's so basic and so simple. It's like, how do you say squeeze your mind? But like if you squeeze your hand over and over, if you're in a situation where you have to squeeze your hand, you eventually get really strong grip strength. So with IQ, there's this type of focus, there's this type of squeezing, and it pulls thoughts, memories, and experiences together in the mind, like these things that are disjointed. There's a mental type of focus, and you can pull those things together, things that have formerly happened, speculations and imaginations about things that will happen, and they can all be like pulled together with this squeezing or with this focus. And when they come close enough together, you can tie them together with chains of reasoning and chains of logic. It's almost like you have a couple of mental hands up there, and you can grab stuff, and then you pull it together. It's like a physical exertion. So some people can pull things together eloquently. It's really, really similar to the physical body. Some people are super strong and can pull just really heavy, like a kind of a boring nerd. Somebody who's like really, really smart but uninteresting. That's kind of the jock of the mental body, and they can pull maybe huge amounts of data together. But they can't really do much beautiful with it or craft it or whatever. And then there's some people that are smart, like construction workers, and they can move giant objects and build new concepts out of them and do all this other stuff. And some people are smart like a monkey, and they can swing and dance and run through concepts like a kind of like that. So there's a squeezing together of ideas, and then that's what allows for chains of verbiage and reasoning. And we have tools that allow us to do that, right? Like a typewriter or a computer or a cell phone. Writing is this tool that allows us to not just run through the ideas and chain them or chain them together with words, but actually to bind them together into structures that we would call like books, or what I'm doing right now is using the audio recording to pull all these ideas together and then kind of throw a net around them in a way, and then make a bag or a bundle of concepts that you then stick your head into. And then the other muscle is, so that's association, conceptualization, tying, binding together, pulling, and then there's also pushing of the mind. So that's how you would disassociate something. That's how you would tease things apart, break down logic chains. So you need to be able to do both to learn. You have to be able to push and pull, just like muscles. You need an antagonist muscle to work a joint complex. So to work the mind, you have to be able to push things, pull things together, and push things apart. And that's kind of like deconstructive logic, is pushing it apart. So some people get obsessed with that. Some people get obsessed with putting things together. And then that requires a particular, a weird type of strength. And some people never, ever use it. And the difference between people's like mental aptitude, the people between people's IQ, I mean, some of it's probably genetic, but also it's just like, did you start squeezing this and using it a lot as a kid or not? And then that makes you like prone to liking to use that muscle group, right? So if you don't ever really get into your legs or use your body or anything, you can be skinny your whole life, right? So the difference between people's IQ is like the difference in leg strength that you see between people, or just the difference in physical strength and ability. So imagine like a really disciplined power lifter, like they have these like massive legs that can lift a ridiculous amount of weight, versus somebody that's never really got into leg strength at all, and they just have these like beanpole legs with like atrophied, rickety joints. Like, right? Like some people have incredibly powerful legs, and then other people have knee problems, and their legs don't work at all. And so the IQ and the brain is identical to this. It's just somewhat invisible. You can see all this by throwing concepts at people and seeing what happens as their mind invisibly moves around the test, or invisibly moves around the ideas. You can see it, but it's invisible. So people can kind of like ignore the realities of intelligence, or ignore the realities of IQ in a way that they can't really ignore the realities of strength. And this used to be more evident, but we have so many mental technologies. Like you have the ability to access the thoughts of any person on Earth, and you know, all the information technology is kind of similar to a car, where anybody and their brother can, like, it doesn't matter how blown out your knees are, you can still drive a car. And so it kind of doesn't matter how low your IQ is or how broken your brain is. You can still functionally appear smart in terms of your ability to wield or manipulate information, even though your mind and your body might be a wreck. Like, you can still ride in this vehicle of culture that we call information technology, and do all the things that a smart person would do. But actually your brain and its pushing and its pulling of concepts and its joint complexes, its logic might be broken. And yeah, some people never learn to do this. I mean, everyone does it kind of consciously, but only some people kind of figure out, like, how do I do it so hard that it gets bigger, right? Like, everyone uses their legs, and some people are like, how do I use my legs so hard that they actually start to adapt and get bigger? And so the same sort of obsessive weirdness, or the same sort of like lifestyle niche, is what causes people's IQ to grow. So some people have natural IQ of like living in a problematic, problem-solving environment. Some people have a high IQ from living in an artificially intellectual environment, like me, like school, college. And then some people never get into it at all. And so just like on the mental plane, there's because this skill is invisible, people tend to identify with it even more than they do their body. Because it's like you can observe your body, so you know, on some level you're like, oh, you have this experience of, at least I'm observing my body, and that means I'm not my body. But you can't really observe your mind, so it just sort of feels like it is you. the implications for all this are fascinatingly staggering in terms of social cohesion and everything else. So like if you're a low, like if your mind's kind of atrophied or broken from exercising it incorrectly, like incorrect mental exercise causes problems the exact same way that incorrect physical exercises cause. And these are, if you were to look at the brain structures or you look at things on the inside, even though it's invisible, the effects of improper thinking technique is as catastrophic as the effect of improper lifting technique. And I'm not going to say there's technique, but there's just, if you do things in a way that's kind of disassociated, or if you do stuff for the wrong reasons to where you're not really paying attention to everything and you're super goal-oriented, like, oh yeah, I just want to win the race, and so you push through and you win the race, but you hurt your knee, your running is forever altered. And it's the same thing with like ideas and debate and stuff like that. So if you're just like, oh, I just want to be right, and you end up, you can be right, and then you can hurt yourself so that your thinking ability is forever altered. And if you look at the what has happened with identity politics and debate and the internet and all these other things, it's basically created these arenas where it's almost impossible to think correctly. So when everyone's like, oh, what has the internet done to us? It's this constant thinking about stuff in such a way that the goal is to be right rather than to dive into or become enmeshed with the process of thinking itself. Right? It's the difference between exercising resentfully and exercising because you love the activity fully with nothing to prove or gain. You just love it. Versus, I want to win. And don't get me wrong, I love debate and I love trying to be right. The same way that I love competing in a sport that I like, but I don't want to compete in that sport at the cost of my health. So it's not like argument and debate and logic and reason are bad, and I would say they're almost essential to develop the mind. But if they are the goal rather than the exercise, it's almost impossible to not really, really, really hurt your mind and to mess it up. And so on the mental plane, there's an entire the difference in strength is curious to me, because it's like there are some things that would take me 10 days to learn, and there's a significant, I would say the majority of the population, it would take them about 40 days to learn the same thing, and there's some people that it would take even longer than that. So there's a bunch of ideas out there that are just like little week-long curious explorations for a mentally healthy person, almost like a weekend hike, like something that you don't even think twice about, and you can just go and you just oh man, I just explored this concept in its entirety. It's like going hiking in the deep woods, like in the Olympic Mountains or something like that, and it's just like, oh yeah, I did a 50-mile hike last weekend. And then, but for most people that seems insane and nearly impossible, and they would have to do like a month-long expedition or train for like 5 or 6 years, or have somebody just carry them. Right, so all of this is invisible, is the really scary thing. So it's like there's this gulf of things. So like people can figure stuff out, and it's like, and then it makes perfect. You're like, yeah, I just ran into the woods and this is there. And I ran up this mountain, and then you can see this, and it's there. I just decided to hike up this mountain, and then everyone else is like, how would you what? How would you get up that? How would you go up that mountain? How, it doesn't, what? You're like, no, I just did it. Oh no, I just climbed this tree. So it's like, imagine this is when it's done with the physical body, people are already like, how are these athletes doing this thing, right? But on this mental plane, and you can't see it. Everyone looks roughly the same. And then since everyone has the power of this technology, they think that they think they can get it, but it's like you can only take your car, you can only take social technology so far. It only goes where things have already been paved, and it doesn't go up trees. You can't really get actual elevation points from anywhere that you are, unless you go to an elevation point that's already been mapped out, right? You can take your little social science car up to these already explored mountains. But you can't just aspect something wherever you are by climbing the logic trees that are around you. Unless you're fit, mentally, and healthy, and capable of pushing and pulling and using that push and pull to alter your entire mental body to actually change your perspective on something. And changing the perspective on something is like going up a tree, or is like going up a mountain, and most people can't actually do that. And I'm not trying to say any of this in a judgmental way. It's this is a huge difference between people, and to not acknowledge it is, I don't know, it's to not acknowledge it is to acquiesce to the mental health crisis that comes about from thinking inappropriately. Or to say that there is no consequence to somebody's long-term mental health from thinking inappropriately. We're allowed to say that there's consequences to incorrect movement, and you have back problems and knee problems and all this other stuff, but it's taboo to say the same thing of conceptualization and of mental performance. The other thing, and then the other thing that I noticed was basically there's this midwit thing to where it's if people aren't identified with the mental body necessarily, they're not blinded by what they can and cannot do. So a simple, untrained person doesn't care about what they can or cannot do. They just accomplish what they need to do with their mind or with somebody else's mind, and so they can work together with smarter people and just accomplish what they need to do. But a pseudo-intellectual or a midwit, who is basically a midwit is anybody that's actually still identified with what their mind can or cannot do. So a midwit is basically the gym rat of intellectuals. It's like mental activity for looks. It's not all that functional, or even if it is functional, it's for the performative aspect of it, or the social knowledge of it. So a super simple person can see this terrain that smart people are climbing up and down. because they're not identified with it. And a really smart person can also see that same terrain because they are kind of free from it and independent of it. They're masters of it. It's just their playground. And then you get a midwit, and a midwit is like a physically unhealthy exercise instructor. It's like somebody whose job or their profession is in a realm of existence in which they're not very good at it, but they're like in an authority position. So pretty much all teenagers are midwits, because they like that. The other thing is, like, if you're moderately smart, you can conceptualize a world, but you can't conceptualize anything beyond your world. So you think that you know everything. Like a simple person doesn't fall into the delusional psychosis that they know everything, so they never lose. They don't become blind. And then a midwit conceptualizes a world that they understand. Like, even if they're like, oh yeah, I know I don't understand some things, they don't include it in their conceptualization. So you can have performative humility or performative non-midwittery, but it's like the activity of the person, not what they say. You know, I've seen you have people talking about the essence of like Tai Chi and Qigong and martial arts and movement and dance and stuff like that, and they can't move, they can't do it, even though they're saying all the right subtle terms about the nature of being, and you just can't do it. And you can have the same thing about intelligence, where people are spouting all the correct terms about, like, oh, what learning is, and they can't do it. So a midwit is like the teenage mind that is just enough information to form a worldview, but not enough strength to integrate any of the big mysteries into that worldview. So a lot of people are aware of the mysteries, but they don't have the courage or the strength to integrate the mysteries into the worldview. Right? In some sense, you take your worldview to the mysteries. You can't really lift the mysteries, but you get the mysteries inside of your worldview one way or another. And then this makes your worldview open-ended, and so then you become not a midwit. And that midwit is somebody blinded by their own thoughts. So you either don't embark on this process to where you're consciously training your mental. Like, if you start consciously training your mind, you enter into this realm within which you are blind until you ingest the mysteries. If you don't ever start consciously training your mind, you're not going to become blinded by your mind. So simple people have what midwit would call, like, oh, that's intuition, and it's like, no, they're just not blinded by thoughts. And then you have people that have integrated mysteries into their mind, and then they are not blinded by thoughts, and they're hyper athletic mentally. And because there is mystery in their worldview, then the thinking is done for the joy of it. So their mental body becomes healthier, instead of getting like knee problems or joint pain or back pain. And our physical body and our physical problems are incredibly reflective of how we're using our mind, actually. So you can see the strengths and weaknesses of people's thoughts are reflected by the strengths and weaknesses of their body. And like, where there's catastrophic injury, you've had catastrophic thinking. But the midwit is blind, so the midwit is like easily controlled. They can't see anything. and you can be intellectually, you can intellectually know that you need to understand the mysteries, just so like you can intellectually know that you need to do like whatever particular type of physical therapy or rehab, or you like know that something needs to be done to get your body healthier. You can know that something needs to be done to pull you out of the range of being a midwit, but it doesn't, it's hard. It's like hard once you've become an adult midwit, right? It's supposed to just be a teenage phase. If you become an adult midwit, it's like an adult with like a physical weakness or a physical problem. It takes a lot of like hard, focused, difficult work to kind of like rectify the situation. And again, this is all invisible. So it sets up this interesting situation where like the hyper intelligent people tend to have the same worldview and the same perspective as the simplest of people. And then it's the pseudo intellectuals in the middle, the midwits. They have ideologies because they identify as their thoughts, and they can't see past it. And so then that's also the realm of like being controlled by demons and stuff like that, because that's the demonic realm in a way. Like those are the native inhabitants of the mental area. And so if you're identified with the thoughts, you can't see the difference between the terrain and the demons. Or that even demons exist. So there's like, it's like modern culture is a plague of midwittery, which is people who are identified with their thoughts. And not only are they identified with their thoughts, but their thought patterns are broken. So it's like somebody being like horrifically physically out of shape, and then also extremely ego identified with their body, which, I mean, that's totally out there, of people that are like, look at me, or like, listen to me. And it's like, about what? You're a yoga instructor? You teach what? And then since you have entire communities and groups and stuff formed around midwittery, they're dependent on their worldview. Their identity is in their worldview rather than the identity being in reality. So it's like a sensitive position that doesn't actually want to know truth, because it doesn't actually want to get better. Because if you were to get better, you'd have to break the worldview. The worldview is actually limiting. And that worldview it obviously copies reality. Like you can have a Christian worldview or a Buddhist worldview or a scientific worldview or whatever. Like you can be a physical wreck and somehow still get a job as a Zumba instructor, as a yoga instructor, as a gym teacher. Right? And even though the things that you're teaching might be amazing things in reality, it's still just a worldview for that midwit instructor. And it's just interesting that all of this stuff is like, it is beyond real, but it's invisible. And so then you get into these like beyond ridiculous situations that are like you could have like just like a physical wreck of a person is because they're in an instructor position, like trying to like coach kids who have more vitality than that person ever remembers having, and then they're like trying to coach them. like that happens physically all the time. You get coaches that have they have zero connection to the actual sport anymore, and they're a coach, and so you on the mental plane, like the fact that things are visible prevents the absurdity of it from getting too terribly large, although I have seen some absurd things in my days in terms of coaching or teaching. I've even been one of those absurd things before. But because it's invisible mentally, like the absurdities can get like absolutely enormous, and then you can't prove it. A, because it's invisible, and B, because it's the identity or the ego. The person is ego identified with the thing. So there can just be like catastrophic things going on, and there's like nothing anybody can do about it, because there's an unwillingness to exist. There's an unwillingness to admit that the mind exists. Anyway, that's some stuff that's just been contemplating.